When DHS rolled out that program, authorities found that about 19% of family units crossing were fraudulent. National security risk, as you say, if we were to ensure that you've said that a warrant requirement would gut, I think was your term, compliance with the Fourth Amendment would gut a tool that you have. Is that essentially?
Well, I did use the word gut, and I stand by it.
Reports on hate crime statistics.
I don't trust you.
I disagree very strongly with
I
any
understand.
number of aspects of it, but I recognize
understand.
that.
Are you seriously saying that 3 warrants a day is too much of a burden for the FBI to protect our Fourth Amendment rights?
That's not what I'm saying. Gutting it with some kind of warrant requirement would be dangerous.
Is the Bureau investigating the DC-5 case?
As I sit here right now, I'm not familiar with the specific case.
The topic of anti-FBI rhetoric raised its head today.
Welcome to the first fiscal year 2025 hearing for the Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies. We want to welcome our witness, the Honorable Christopher Wray, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, back to this subcommittee. Director Wray, who has nearly 30 years of DOJ and FBI experience dating back to the late 1990s, has served in his current role since August of 2017. In his capacity as director, he oversees an agency of over 35,000 people, including special agents, intelligence analysts, language specialists, scientists, and information technology specialists. Director, has the Bureau observed any improvements in our efforts to dismantle that fentanyl pipeline? And what role can the Bureau play here?
So I would say it's a mixed bag. Certainly, the scourge of fentanyl is still claiming way, way, way too many lives. And I will tell you that from the FBI's perspective, one of the things that we've been observing is that in our takedown of violent gangs, which is, of course, something that we're doing all over the country all the time, we are noticing almost without exception now that those takedowns of violent gang members also include seizures of fentanyl. So the fentanyl that's coming from the cartels, built on precursors from China, ending up all over the United States, is often being distributed, of course, by these violent street gangs. So that is one of the things that we're observing. We are trying to do our part. This goes way beyond any one agency and, frankly, beyond law enforcement, as I know a lot of your efforts recognize. But some of the things that we at the FBI are doing to try to do our part, I'll mention a few. Our Safe Streets task forces are going after the gangs that are distributing so much of this poison. Our organized crime, our TOC, transnational organized crime task forces, are going after the cartels. We have close to 400 investigations that go just after cartel leadership. We also have things like J-Code, which is an initiative where we bring together 12 agencies that's focused on the dark web trafficking of fentanyl and other dangerous substances.
My observation is we're not getting enough cooperation out of the Mexican government on seeking out the cartels. Can you agree or disagree with that?
Well, the way I would put it is we certainly need more from the Mexican government. I'm pleased with what we have gotten, but we need a lot more.
And do you need more money to do that or less money?
We need more money to do that.
Need more money. Now, you mentioned takedowns of violent gangs, and you're noticing that it so often includes seizures of massive amounts of fentanyl. Am I correct in that?
That's absolutely right. I think something like 75% of the fentanyl we're seizing is coming in gang takedowns, something in that magnitude.
Now, tell me about these gangs. Are these American citizens?
Most of the gangs themselves are are neighborhood gangs. I mean, there are, gangs that come from the Northern Triangle, like MS-13 and so forth as well, but a lot of the takedowns that I'm describing that we're dismantling are frankly neighborhood gangs who are then the ones peddling the fentanyl on the streets, not just in the border states, but all over the country.
When DHS rolled out that program, authorities found that about 19% of family units crossing were fraudulent. Does that sound about right?
That part I don't have any reason to dispute it, but as I sit here right now, I can't remember that specific piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
But failure to properly identify individuals coming across the border engaged in human trafficking, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking are attempting to evade identification, correct?
Right. I mean, the whole identification piece of this is, I think you're rightly putting your finger on, is such an important part of it. And that's why, for example, we have, trying to be good partners with DHS, we have been providing them with DNA kits that then our lab is the one who would then test, and it has proven to be critical in identifying murderers, rapists, and all sorts of dangerous individuals.
But you have a shortfall, right? You have a backlog.
And we have a backlog, and that backlog, because of the sheer volume at the border, with the volume of people coming across, the volume of the need for samples has gone skyrocketing as well. So there's a backlog, and the backlog should be of concern to all of us.
Do you think it would be appropriate or would address this national security risk, as you say, if we were to ensure that these individuals would not be released until their identification is complete?
Well, certainly I think that's something we should be taking a look at. I mean, that gets into sort of DHS's authority, so I'm a little reluctant to, given the sheer number of things that are on our plate, before I start weighing in on what should be on somebody else's plate, but I will tell you that we have any number of instances where somebody who is of concern, where there wasn't adequate biometrics or other identification information at the time they came across, then later information is found that highlights why they're of concern, and then it's the FBI and our partners who have to then go try to find the person, take whatever action we can to disrupt the threat that that person poses.
You've said that a warrant requirement would gut, I think was your term. Compliance with the Fourth Amendment would gut a tool that you have. Is that essentially?
Well, I did use the word gut, and I stand by it. I would say a couple things. First, when you say compliance with the Fourth Amendment, let's be clear. No court, as in none, has ever held that a warrant is required under the Fourth Amendment for the FBI to run queries of information that's already lawfully in our holdings under Section 702. And the only courts to have addressed the issue
But isn't
have
that
gone the other way. So that's one.
But isn't that information, the intent of the law designed to provide the information of foreign nationals, not American citizens who are, and wouldn't that really be an end run around the statute, as you say, to lawfully obtain this information?
No, I appreciate the question. I think the purpose of Section 702 is to identify foreign threats to us, to Americans. And so when you have, I'll give you an example to illustrate the point. It is critical for our ability to identify foreign terrorist organizations communicating with, inspiring, or working with people here in the U.S., and that's how we identify and stop attacks.
Along with several of my colleagues in the House and Senate, have previously communicated with the DOJ and the FBI about the importance of the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program's reports on hate crime statistics. I'm concerned about the trend of a decrease in the number of local law enforcement agencies providing the FBI with incident data. This is the 5th year in a row that the number of local agencies providing data to the FBI has declined. Wanted to ask how your agency may be working with local law enforcement agencies to increase participation in this reporting system.
So I think you're right to ask about the issue, because one of the things we know about hate crime reporting, just in general, as a starting point, is that it's chronically underreported. And so for quite some time now, we've been trying to engage in different forms of outreach to our law enforcement partners to make it easier for them to understand what to report and how to report it and so forth. And so that effort is continuing, and we're always trying to find new and better ways to improve their responsiveness, if you will. The second thing that I think contributes to the trend that you're describing is the conversion to NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And of course, that affects statistics not just on hate crimes, but on all sorts of other crime reporting as well.
I'll be honest with you, and this pains me to say this, but I don't trust you. I don't think that this is necessarily a funding problem that we have for your agency as much as a leadership problem. And between the lack of transparency in hearings like this and in Intel hearings, your weaponization and politicization of issues and instruments of national security against innocent Americans and against institutions like churches, and the fact that you have held no one truly accountable for prior FISA abuses that we have all seen and recognized. I think you yourself have acknowledged that there's been abuses, and because of the fact that as the FBI director that you've stood relatively silent and passive about the biggest national security threat to our nation, that being our very open southern border, as the chairman has been discussing. Can I just get a simple yes or no response to this question? Does the open border policy make your job easier or harder? Are we safer or less safe as a result of the open border policy?
I have been consistent over the years, frankly, in citing my concerns about the threats that emanate from the border.
Okay.
And as to the long narrative that you went through at the beginning, needless to say, I disagree very strongly with any number of aspects of it, but I recognize that we're
in the
time
interest of
limited.
time, I
Right.
want you to acknowledge that the open border policy makes us more insecure than and strong. So I want to know, what have your discussions been with the president? Have you been able to go into his office and say, boss, this open border policy is a galactically stupid policy from a national security perspective? Have you had that conversation? If so, what did that look like? What has been the response? And how are we shaping this to make us more secure in the future?
Well, I'm not going to get into specific conversations with people. I've been consistent in my message externally and internally about my concerns about the threats that are from the FBI's perspective that emanate from the border.
Considering the critical role NICS plays in preventing firearms from reaching the wrong hands, can you just share with me how the budget request will allow the FBI to address these, what I expect are, and assume are pretty labor-intensive enhancements to the operation of NICS as transactions continue to grow?
So I appreciate the question. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act added a number of additional checks that NICS was responsible for conducting, specifically focused on, as we would call it, the U21 group population. And this committee, and we're very grateful for that, helped get us, at the time of the passage of the act, funding to bring on board positions and make certain systems changes. But the problem is it was one-time funding. And so that if we're going to sustain the work, then we need funding to continue it. And that's what you see reflected in the request here. It's both to continue those positions, because it's, as you say, very labor-intensive, but also for systems enhancements to have the human workforce, have them be even more efficient in their work. I've been out there myself and sat with the operators who were doing the checks on a couple of occasions to see, and so I can see kind of how labor-intensive it is. I'm very pleased with the fact that they're already getting much, much faster at them. And I think that's only going to improve, but we still do need the funding. Again, the way to remember it is just, funding was there, but it was one-time funding, and we just need the funding to sustain it. Otherwise, it sort of loses its effectiveness.
So, Director Wray, does the FBI currently comply in every way with the current Section 702 of FISA?
My understanding is that we're in compliance with the law.
Okay, so you think you do. All right, how do you respond to an unsealed document released by the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court on May 19th, 2023, which states your agency, the FBI, illegally misused this tool more than 278,000 times between 2020 and early 2021? And is this number of 278,000 abuses accurate?
So I appreciate the question. I'm glad to have the opportunity to clarify that. So first off, I would say that that opinion covers activity, querying activity that occurs all before all these reforms that we've put in place. So that's number one. Second,
When did you start putting those reforms in place?
Mid
after this?
2022, somewhere in that range.
2022 or 2023?
They started in 2022 and they kind of rolled into 23. They obviously
Okay,
don't just
all
flick
right.
a switch. But,
All right.
but the second thing I would say too is when you look at the FISA court, the same judges evaluating our compliance with 702 after all those reforms have put in place, you see consistently compliance rates well into the high 90% range. And the court actually commending the FBI for the improvements that they've seen because of the reform. So that's the second point.
Okay.
A third
so-
point I would make to you, third point, this is important because you asked. A third point that is important is that the querying that you're talking about in that opinion that again covers older activity, something like 99.7% of it would all have been prevented by the reforms that we've put in place.
Okay.
On top of that, the vast majority of those queries, the 278,000, are not actually 702 queries, much less non-compliant 702 queries.
Well, let me ask you this. This report ended in early 2021, and you started in mid-2022, so that would be an entire year. So during that time frame, how many times did the FBI abuse its FISA authority? Do you know?
I don't have any period of non-compliance that I can report here from that period, but I can
Okay.
tell you, this.
Well,
The
all right,
court,
that-
the
thank-
court's
thank you for
opinion
answering
that
that
covers the
question.
more recent period.
As you know, the
Once-
government agencies typically need a warrant issued by a judge before they can access American citizens' phone calls, texts, internet searches, and emails. However, the government, in my opinion, has been able to query Section 702 acquired communications as an end run around the Fourth Amendment. Now, Director Wray, you've got more than 30,000 employees that work for the FBI. Are you seriously saying that 3 warrants a day is too much of a burden for the FBI to protect our Fourth Amendment rights?
That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, number one, no court has found that the Fourth Amendment requires us to use a warrant to look at information, to query information that's already in our 702 holdings lawfully, and the only courts to look at it have gone the other way. That's one. Number two, the problem with the warrant requirement goes beyond any kind of burden or delay that comes with it. The big part of the problem is that it's often only by running the query that we get to see the information that tells us whether or not we would meet a warrant requirement in the first place.
All right,
because
I've
these are
got one more
conducted at
question
the
for you
front
before my
end
time
of
runs
the
out.
investigation.
All right. We have, looking at the breakdown of the FBI's $11.3 billion budget, like last year, almost 60% of the budget is categorized as defense spending and only 40% as non-defense spending. And to me, that seems odd. I read your mission priorities and I did not see any reference to DOD. I mean, the FBI is not part of the Department of Defense and they're a domestic law enforcement agency. So why is the FBI's budget categorized as 60% defense spending?
I believe the answer to your question, and I'm not an appropriations expert, but I believe the answer to your question is what's so-called NIP funding, which is overseen by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So a significant chunk of our budget is considered defense spending because of its part of the intelligence community budget, if you will. So it gets a little more complicated than that, but I think that's the high-level answer to your question.
Okay, all right, my time has expired, Mr. Chairman.
This issue is one of the most important issues. So could you please say why it's so important that we pass this and not get caught up in a Trump issue because he's mad? He authorized this law when he was president. So come on, let's not play the hypocrisy. Could you please tell the public at this point, or us, where we are and why it's so important?
So Section 702 is indispensable in keeping Americans safe from a whole barrage of fast-moving foreign threats. It is crucial to identifying terrorists in the homeland, working with or inspired by a rogues gallery of foreign terrorist organizations who have publicly called for attacks against our country. It helps us find out who these terrorists are working with and what they're targeting, and it's what we need to stop them before they kill Americans. 702 is crucial when countries like China or Iran target dissidents and Americans here in the homeland. In Iran's case, literally even for things like kidnapping and assassination, 702 is what helps us know who to warn and help disrupt the plot. 702 is crucial to our ability to warn and protect our critical infrastructure from hackers in China, in Russia, Iran, including cyber threats to our electricity, our water, our hospitals. So if Congress lets 702 lapse, which it's set to do now next week, it will massively increase the risk of missing crucial intelligence during a time of heightened national security threats across a whole multiple of fronts. And if we're blinded from seeing what our adversaries are doing, who they're working with, I can tell you that's gonna most definitely have consequences for our ability to protect the American people, because I can assure you that none of our adversaries are tying their own hands. So now is not the time for us to hang up our gloves, to take away tools that we need to punch back. And failing to reauthorize 702 or gutting it with some kind of warrant requirement would be dangerous and put American lives at risk.
I did a swing through West Texas. I'm seeing a significant increase in oil theft in West Texas. All my sheriffs are asking for help. Are there any opportunities to expand the FBI oil field theft task force?
So absolutely, we're very proud of the work that our West Texas offices are doing in terms of the Permian Basin oil field task force. It's created due to the fact that I think something like 40% of the oil in the U.S. comes from the West Texas region. And so that task force, has not only state and local law enforcement participation, but we also have, which is a bit innovative, cleared oil field security personnel. Typically they're former law enforcement as well, but also on the task force. And it's a way to kind of track oil field crime, to ensure that investigations move as quickly and effectively as possible. It is a complex, it's a form of critical infrastructure threat, and it's something we're very focused on.
What happens? Because there are many, as you know, would look to defund the FBI. Been a lot of discussion about that, cut back on the resources. What does that mean to the support of that national infrastructure, if you will, that you rely on and they rely on you in order to deal with violent crime and other things in the U.S.? If you could comment on that.
Sure. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't fully appreciate is how integrated today's FBI is with state and local law enforcement, and how dependent, frankly, state and local law enforcement is on us when it comes to fulfilling our shared mission of keeping Americans safe. You mentioned the task forces. Through our Safe Streets and Violent Crime Task Forces, we've got thousands of police officers and sheriff's deputies from hundreds of different departments and agencies that serve on our task forces, taking, as I said, I think earlier, last year we took together 50 violent criminals and child predators off the streets per day, every single day, all year long, 365 days a year when you average it out. A cut to our budget means a cut to our efforts to do that work, which means more of the burden then gets shifted on the state and local law enforcement to handle those threats alone. I could go the same thing through multiple other threats, because we have task forces on terrorism, cyber, child exploitation, et cetera.
Instead of seeking justice for these babies or answers to whether federal crimes are committed, I'm concerned that some in the administration have decided to weaponize the FBI and its resources against pro-life Americans by investigating and arresting individuals for the FACE Act violations. Is the Bureau aware of the DC-5 case? And if so, is the Bureau investigating the DC-5 case?
As I sit here right now, I'm not familiar with the specific case. I can follow up with our folks on that.
Can you think of any time when the FBI has actually, used color of law to prosecute someone for violating someone's Second Amendment rights?
Well, not as I sit here, but obviously we're a 115-year-old organization with 38,000 employees and something like 300 offices all over the United States. So I'm no doubt that there could be any number of investigations that I wouldn't be aware of.
Okay. In fact, if the total spending for the DOJ is going up $467 million, and the FBI is asking for $629 million, then the DOJ actually has to take a cut somewhere in order for the FBI to get their increase in funding of at least $162 million. So what on earth, what justifies that kind of an increase for the FBI?
So what I would tell you is, and we certainly appreciate the department's support, including the Attorney General's support for our budget request. The effect of the fiscal year 2024 budget that was appropriated to us is the equivalent of about 1,000 per position cut. It's about a $500 million cut in our ability to get our job done.
Okay, so what are the technical adjustments? $192 million for technical adjustments and $286 million in adjustments to base. What is that?
I think the adjustments to base is sort of appropriations speak for the point that I was just making about getting us back on track in terms of the positions that essentially we would lose because of the impact on our cost of operations of the '24 budget.
And the technical adjustments?
That part, again, I'd have to go back and look at the
Okay.
specifics, but I can tell you that most of our budget is to get us back on track. We have a few enhancements, specifically on cyber, counterintelligence, and NICS.
Director Wray, the topic of anti-FBI rhetoric raised its head today, and I wish to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Ruppersberger that I am dismayed about it, and particularly that it found its way into today's hearing. I regret that it has become fashionable in some corners to attack the FBI. This is an elite law enforcement agency. The top law enforcement agency in this country protects us from all manner of mayhem.
I'm happy to take up what amounts to a large chunk of my time to stand up for my colleagues who have left and who are under criticism from members of this very subcommittee, and to restate that there is a First Amendment. We have a right to criticize when there is evidence of wrongdoing. We have a responsibility to the taxpayers of this country when there are individuals within your agency who violate the rights of American citizens related to abouts collection. Abouts. So the FBI has decided not to engage in what amounts to collection of upstream communication from companies that operate internet cables that interconnect with ISPs' local networks to include the collections of communications about a target. Why did you all stop abouts collection?
Well, I will confess to you, it's been a little while since I looked at that issue. It was very much on our mind back around the time of the last reauthorization, as I recall. I think, again, my memory's not perfect on this, but I think it was a judgment that the benefits from having that were outweighed by, in our view, the potential that the authority could result in a compliance violation of some sort.
Do you have
And
any intention-
my memory's a little fuzzy on that, so with that big caveat,
Do you have any intention of resuming abouts collection at this time?
no.
And I think that the comments that were made. And I respect that individual. I said that before I even talked about it. And I do respect him because he's a hard worker. He served at the Naval Academy. And I was just shocked that the whole 5 minutes or whatever he had, it was in criticizing someone who I happen to respect. And I think a lot of other people respect, who has one of the hardest jobs in America. What bothers me is that we are probably in one of the worst situations for national security in the history of our country. And he's a major part of dealing with those issues. And I would hope that someone with his expertise and smarts, and he's very smart, and I will talk to him personally because I know him personally, but that would spend doing this and not talk about what are we going to do with this issue or that, which everyone else here has talked to him about. And I just was shocked.
The subcommittee now stands adjourned.